go ahead.
Well, I would go ahead and like to let and welcome everyone who is viewing this town hall on Facebook and in Zoom. Um, Welcome. We're glad you're here. My name's Katie. I'm going to be the tech host. So I will be monitoring both the chats in Facebook Live and on Zoom if you decide to join us there. So if you have a comment or concern, I'll go ahead and make sure I let them know so that we can, make sure we have good conversation here. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the beautiful, wonderful Karla Bailey-Smith, our candidate for Illinois House of Representatives, District 88.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you for everyone joining us for this conversation, or perhaps watching later on YouTube. I want to remind people who might not already know that before I started running for office, I was already working on the initiative to end cash bail. This work really opened my eyes to injustice and repercussions that people experience before they've even gone to trial. Repercussions like, if the bail is just a few $100s and they don't have it, they're stuck in like a county jail, and they might lose their job, they might lose their home, they might lose their kids. So these are all very important reasons to look at our pre-trial justice. And I have with me tonight Malik Alim, who is one of the leaders for the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Malik. Please tell us your history, how you got involved with ending cash bail, and what your position is right now.
Sure. So thank you for having me. Again, my name is Malik Alim. I'm the campaign coordinator for the Coalition to End Money Bond and the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. The Coalition to End Money Bond was formed around 2016 in Cook County with the goal of pushing back against the pretrial incarceration system and trying to restore the kind of bedrock of what's supposed to be the bedrock of our criminal justice system, which is the presumption of innocence. And so the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice is an extension of that coalition and engages in the same work all across the state of Illinois. So Karla, like she mentioned before, has been a member of the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. So for quite some time, so we're happy to have her and to be on here to talk about some of the things that we're trying to push into to repair some of the harms that have been done by mass incarceration. And so just a little bit about myself and how I come to the work. I've been an organizer for about 5 years in Chicago, working on different issues related to police accountability, education equality, housing equality, and specifically around organizing young people to help work on policy change in the past, and then most currently as the campaign coordinator for the Coalition to End Money Bond. My work mainly revolves around organizing organizers. So what that looks like is different advocates who are fighting for pretrial reforms and more broadly criminal justice reforms at large. Are engaged in that work, and so it takes someone to sift through and kind of make sure all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in terms of getting people to the meetings, pushing legislative strategy, and generally organizing and mobilizing people around the issue at hand, which again is pretrial incarceration, and with the goal of ending money bond.
Right. Okay, so I was interested in hearing you say that you've been an organizer for a number of years. Now, were you employed by an organization as an organizer, or did you start doing this while you were holding another job? Oh, I just lost you. You must have hit the
Sorry.
space bar.
So I started organizing in college, and dropped out of college and started organizing full time as a volunteer, while also doing part-time work in other spaces. But kind of immersed myself in the organizing culture in Chicago, and became part of different groups like the Black Youth Project 100 and the Let Us Breathe Collective, who both organize around Black liberation and the Black freedom movement in that lineage. And then specifically, around policy reform, I also worked previously at the Roosevelt Institute, which is a progressive think tank based in New York. And my job there was getting young people and college students engaged in the policy process. And so, all of my kind of different forays into the organizing landscape have kind of brought me to where I am right now. And identifying that mass incarceration is one of the biggest issues that personally I feel that we need to tackle before we can get to a lot of the other social issues that are in the kind of public discourse right now. And so the main driver of mass incarceration is pretrial incarceration, and that being the fact that people are being locked up and held in jail before even being sentenced or convicted of a crime. And so, in order to restore that presumption of innocence, we understand that ending money bond and ending that practice of keeping people locked up based on their access to money, and without even having found them guilty of a crime, is what is filling our jails in different counties across the state and across the nation. And so, knocking down that domino will help us to start reversing the harms of mass incarceration. And so that is where, I feel is a good place to start.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so the next question I had for you is, where are we with the legislation now? Are we at a place where it's actually called the Pretrial Justice Act?
So the legislation at the Coalition to End Money Bond has been kind of honing and developing over the years. Right now, the current iteration of it is called the Pretrial Fairness Act.
Fairness, that's it. Pretrial Fairness Act. Yep.
Right. So, and with that, so at the beginning of this year, kind of take you on the arc of where we are with the legislation right now, and then we can get into kind of what the actual legislation says and how it changes the system that we have. But at the beginning of this year, Governor Pritzker announced that there was a few different criminal justice reforms that would be on his priority list for this upcoming year, and included ending money bond as one of those issues. And so after that, that happened in January, and so then we were kind of working. At that point, already had a bill, a complete bill, and we're about to introduce it into the legislature, but kind of entered into a process with the governor's office and different stakeholders across the state to kind of try to make sure, everyone was on board with that piece of legislation and make sure that it could pass. So that working group process kind of got put on hold, just like everything else in the world did when the pandemic hit. And so since then, the kind of legislative landscape has been up in the air. The spring session was canceled, and then in conversations with our kind of legislative champions and partners, have been working to make sure that our issue and our bill, the Pretrial Fairness Act, is put on the table to be voted on this November during veto session. So a lot of the kind of heavy hot ticket items in terms of legislative priorities in the state have been kind of put on the back burner and pushed to this November and December to be worked out. And so that is kind of where we are now. We're hoping and praying and we're moving and organizing with that in mind, that we will have an opportunity to actually pass this legislation this fall and this winter.
Right. So we expect the current legislators to go back in November after after the general election. Is that correct?
Correct. So I'm not sure the exact dates, but they
Mhm.
have two different 3-day sessions in November
Mhm.
and December, which, you know, as it's called, veto session, is usually reserved for bills that have been vetoed and reworked and then brought back to the
Mhm.
table. But in this weird time we're living in, there will be a lot of new bills, maybe not a
Mhm.
lot, but there will certainly be some new bills introduced in veto session to be voted on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a constituent, I would hope that our lawmakers would go back and get some work done, some real work, not just not that there's anything that's been vetoed that they have to rework, but but we need there's a lot that we need them to be working on. Um, I did want to ask, within the legislation as it exists right now, um, can you describe some of the different aspects of pretrial fairness? Because it's not just about ending money bond; it's about the way we do a risk assessment on people, whether they should be locked up, if they're a danger to themselves or others.
Right. So I will just kind of clarify the risk assessment language. We want to
Hmm.
kind of be clear that a lot of the risk assessment tools that are used in a lot of different locales and communities across the state and the nation, we have a lot of, as a network and a coalition, have a lot of concerns about in terms of their efficacy and, actually predicting, quote unquote, predicting a person's risk level in terms of if they will
Okay.
commit crime or not. But to be clear, the so as it is right now, kind of I'll use a story to kind of illustrate
Okay.
what some of the a personal story. So in college, I got pulled over driving home to Chicago from Springfield, I think. So I had to go up through Joliet, and I got pulled over
Hmm.
in Joliet for speeding. So I received a ticket, and then I was going to school on the south side of Chicago, so I didn't really have a good way to get from the south. I was driving my mother's car, so getting from the
Hmm.
south side where I'm at, on campus, to Will County to Joliet for court was, something that I had to figure out. And as college students are often irresponsible, I did not figure out in time how I would get to
Hmm.
that court date, so I missed it, and then I ended up forgetting about it. And so fast forward, 2 or 3 years, I was pulled over and arrested because I had a warrant out for my arrest for a missed court date back,
Mm.
that I had forgotten 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And so, part of what went into that was that as a college student and as someone who, had multiple residences during that time, a lot of male communication wasn't actually happening, and I wasn't getting and receiving it. So part of what's in the Pretrial Fairness Act is a reform on how we handle people who miss court, and how we even kind of approach the idea of people coming to court and people wanting to actually be involved in the process of mitigating the fact that they are engaged in the justice system, right? Like, most people aren't flight risks. Most people don't want to go on
Hmm.
the run and have to
Yeah.
look over the shoulder, right? They want to resolve their case and they want to move on with their
Hmm.
life. So
Right.
part of the Pretrial Fairness Act is that it's a reform on how on warrants. So there would be a reminder system, right? So if you get a court date,
Hmm.
you would receive a reminder to show up to that court date. Um, and then the kind of punitive measure of issuing a warrant for arrest for a one missed court date would be removed, and kind of uh, the fairness comes in when we're able to kind of take each individual case and look at the details and aspects of it and figure out what's going on with this person. How do we get them to court if they're not able to make it on their own?
Hmm.
So that's one of the things that I'm excited about for transforming this pretrial system, right? So as opposed to having this punitive, kind of punishment hierarchy that we have now, we kind of take a more humanist approach to
Yeah.
understanding how to get people where they need to be, and how to resolve their cases.
Great. Oh, thank you for that. And that's a good reminder of how something as simple as being a student where you're moving around, you're in different types of living arrangements. You might be in a dorm. For a few months, you might be in an apartment. It's easy to miss mail. Yeah, the little things like that can turn into an enormous problem for people, and have. I mean, we know we've heard plenty of stories about people just with traffic tickets who then get arrested, and then they've got fines, and then they've got court fees on top of it, and it's
Right.
yeah.
And to kind of round out that story, the larger kind of aspect of the Pretrial Fairness Act, the part of it that actually ends money bond. So what ended up happening to me was, because I had a case in another county, Will County. I was living in Cook County and arrested in Cook County, and was held in Cook County for 5 days before being extradited to Will County to have a bond hearing, where my father was able to pay a $500 bond to get me out, right, for this traffic ticket. Under the new system, the idea that we would take a much closer look at who we are locking up and for what reasons, right? So, it doesn't make sense for most people that you ask will say that it doesn't make sense for someone to be in jail, right, locked in a cage for a week because of a speeding ticket that they didn't pay a few years ago, right? So actually identifying and making the decision of, keeping someone incarcerated and actually putting the proper weight to that decision is a big part of the Pretrial Fairness Act. So under the new system, the arresting officers would be able to have the discretion to cite and release based on the infraction, right? So as it were right now, if someone is caught driving with a suspended license or without a license, they have to be arrested. And so to reform that system, to give a little bit more leeway, for resources to be used in more, in better ways, right? They would be able to decide, this guy doesn't need to go to jail. He needs to get a summons. He needs a reminder to show up to Will County Court, and then we go from there, right? So that's part of what the Pretrial Fairness Act would give us the opportunity to do.
Yeah, great. I'm going to take a moment and ask Katie if there's any questions or comments on the Facebook Live.
We don't have any yet, but I'm keeping an eye out. So
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was just how I came to care about these things. But while Malik's still here, I just want to acknowledge that the reason. So first of all, the USA incarcerates more people per capita than any other country in the world. I think most of us have heard this before, and certainly in this last year, with increased awareness around Black Lives Matter, and also the 1619 Project, if people have heard of that and perhaps been following either the podcast or read the book, understanding that our system of mass incarceration is rooted in our history of slavery and our oppression of people of color in this country. And really, in the years of Reconstruction, that is when the prison system was really born in this country, the mass incarceration, because southern states in particular would criminalize common behaviors in order to lock up former slaves and turn them back into turn them back into slaves, having them work for free within the context of a prison system, using the 13th Amendment for that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And Malik, if you would like to say something about that, please feel free to do so.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. And then it's also important to acknowledge that the kind of extension of, that intentional and strategic systematic oppression that you're speaking about, the kind of extension of that, and how class politics and racial politics in this country are inextricably linked. What we see now with mass incarceration, and particularly pretrial incarceration, is a continued war on poverty, and a continued extraction of resources from already vulnerable communities. And so, what we know about, people who are paying bond, people who are getting arrested, right, are mostly Black men, Black and brown men, also women as well. But when we talk about the economic impact and who carries the brunt of that responsibility, it's Black women and brown women who are having to, rally the family and figure out how to pay these bonds. And so, that specific kind of, economic aspects to, this problem is particularly insidious, and what we need to do better at, and what the Pretrial Fairness Act kind of lays the framework for, is identifying how do we remove money as a factor in determining freedom, sure, but how do we also make sure that our county jails and sheriff's departments, who are kind of at times counting on the money that they receive from bonds and fines and fees, for people who have been incarcerated pre-trial, right? How do we actually make good policy and determine, better places and better ways to allocate funds so that these entities can operate? Because it doesn't make sense for us to be budgeting and actually planning, to incarcerate enough people to be able to have, a solid operating budget for a court or a county jail. That's not, that is not good policy. And so the Pretrial Fairness Act, there's a provision in there that, mandates for greater court transparency. So we know what kinds of people are being incarcerated, who needs to actually be incarcerated, and how do we, remove the specter of money from that process, and actually focus on justice and justice, and making sure people stay out of that system.
Right. Yeah. So as a potential legislator, something that I hope to see within the state of Illinois is that we decriminalize drug addiction. There are a lot of people who have been locked up for drug offenses, and many of those people are addicts. They don't need to be locked up. They need help. It costs the state of Illinois $30,000 a year to house a criminal in the Illinois state prison system. This is not your county jails, but someone who has been convicted of an offense and is within the Illinois State Department of Corrections. $30,000 a year. I don't even make $30,000 a year. And the idea that we're using our tax dollars in that way, when our tax dollars could be better spent in investment in our communities, investment in drug rehabilitation programs. To me, that just seems like a no-brainer. Why aren't we doing that? Why haven't we done that? It's a long time coming. And another thing that I would like to see is other ways for nonviolent offenders to pay for their crimes. More community service, less jail time. allow people to carry on doing their jobs, paying their bills, living with their families. And I really hope that I'm elected so I can help look at ways to solve these problems. I did have somebody that I was hoping would join, and apparently he is not going to be available. So I'll just give Malik one more opportunity if you have anything else that you'd like to add.
I just would I want to give um, some confidence to you, in your campaign and in highlighting these issues, and that these are important issues to you. It's going to take people who are thinking about how incarceration, at its core, right? Like a lot of times, the discussions kind of revolve around, drug charges or drug arrests and violent or nonviolent, and who should be out. And at the end of the day, the conversations that we are having about mass incarceration and pretrial justice come back to the idea and the question at the kind of root and core of our identity. Do we want to be a carceral prison state? Do we want to be a punitive kind of punishment bureaucracy? Or do we want to identify what the root causes to some of these byproducts of divestment, systematic oppression, years of policies that have been designed not even just to keep people out, but designed to bury people within the confines of structural systematic oppression. And so like at the end of the day, people make mistakes, and people are held accountable to them. And so what we want to see kind of is a move and a shift in the consciousness of the people to understand that, cages are not necessarily the answer to a healthier society. And so that's what I know you understand, Karla, and I'm excited to continue working with you to get our bill passed this year, and to have a better system for our state.
Right. And I just remembered thinking about if it doesn't pass this fall session, that if I'm elected, I would be really happy to be in Springfield working for this to get it passed as early as possible when the session starts in January. And it reminded me that there's actually a day of action early in November. If you want to tell us a little bit about that.
So actually, the day of action is actually at the end of September. And so statewide, there will be different actions from different groups that are within the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, and highlighting, what the issue is, why we need the Pretrial Fairness Act to pass, and then kind of just tying together the larger, social movements that we're seeing happening, and specifically why pretrial incarceration and pretrial fairness tie into all of that we're talking about. And then also coming up in November, on November 10th, I can definitely give you the information if people can register, but we're going to be holding a series of, we'll be having a virtual lobby day on November 10th. So,
right, that's the one I was thinking of.
Right. So yeah, obviously COVID-19 has a lot of, everything different than it was. So we can't actually show up to the state capitol like we did in February in mass. And so we're going to do that virtually online. There will be advocates, community members, and legislators invited, and folks will have the opportunity to, actually nail down the specifics of this bill and make sure that our legislators understand what it is, and get them on the right track to be voting the right way in November.
Right. Okay, yeah, thanks for reminding me about the September date. I had remembered the November one. I'll make sure to share those on my campaign page. Katie, are there any questions or comments on the Facebook Live?
We have a couple folks who are tuned in, but doesn't seem like there's any questions so far.
Okay, well, I would welcome any questions. I'm going to say just a few things about my thoughts on prison reform. I was very affected by listening to a story about prisoners in California who fight fires, and they're only paid about $2 a day to do this work. And then when they're out of prison, there is no system in place to make sure that these skills that they have learned give them a job after the fact. And yesterday, I was fortunate to talk with Glenn Jackson in Springfield, and he gave me some very helpful information and some places to look for statistics. And I learned that in the state of Illinois, um, prisoners in Illinois do not make products for for-profit companies. But there is a system in the state of Illinois where prisoners are making products that are used by the government, such as park benches and tables, furniture for schools. Um, I don't know if we have any ex-offenders tuning in on Facebook. As a person running for office, I'm very interested and ready to listen to people's lived experience within the prison system. I want to know what that experience is like, and to make sure that people are being treated fairly. I have come across a couple of people who don't necessarily have a lot of good things to say about their work experience within the Illinois prison system. So it looks good on paper, but when you're in that experience, it might feel very different. So that's one thing I wanted to share. Um, and so on one hand, Illinois is one of a handful of states that prohibits for-profit companies using prison labor. There are a lot of states that that unfortunately are using large numbers of prisoners and paying them just pennies a day. And of course, that has to be a federal issue or a state-by-state issue to be resolved. But within Illinois, I'm definitely willing to listen to people's experience and to look at any problems that we might need to resolve with the treatment of prisoners within our system. So I just wanted to share that. And if there's no other questions in the chat or on Facebook, let's see. I don't see any comments to address.
No, I think we look pretty good.
Okay.
I say that the last thing I mean, personally, something that I wanted to
Yeah, go right
ask
ahead.
about. I had a friend who was asking me if they would be eligible to vote. If they did have previous convictions, so I didn't know if that was something you could address real quick before you.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. I meant to, but yes, if you have been previously incarcerated, as long as you have served your sentence and you are no longer incarcerated, you can vote. You will probably have to re-register if you haven't voted since before your incarceration. But once your sentence is completed in the state of Illinois, you are allowed to vote. There are no restrictions against an ex-offender being able to vote. Did you have any, Malik, did you have anything else you wanted to add or to say before we sign off?
No, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. All right.